When I was a boy and played with the gang, we did a lot of things. We roasted potatoes, went on expeditions, we tipped over garbage cans now and then, we wrote nasty remarks about the teacher on the sidewalk. But we never spent an afternoon sitting around like this, reading. When I was a boy and played with the gang, we did a lot of things. We roasted potatoes, we went on expeditions, we tipped over garbage cans now and then, we wrote nasty remarks about the teacher on the sidewalk. But we never spent an afternoon sitting around like this, reading.
To how Mouse ruined comics.
Okay.
All right, 30 seconds. Your 30 seconds are up. No more boomer music.
Stop right there, criminal scum.
Good gravy. I was not expecting that.
What did I just, lets himself out all Muppet style. Doop, 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 doop.
Welcome to Thursday. No, it's not Thursday. Oh my goodness. I'm dealing in last year's time schedule. It's Wednesday. It's the Mattriarchy. I am today joined as usual by Twitless.
What's up?
And we are going to just open a giant, smelly, wriggling can of worms tonight. We are talking about the Comics Code Authority. Ba, ba, ba. We are joined tonight by Bob Jones.
How you doing, folks?
Who thinks the Comics Code was a terrible idea.
No. I'm for the Comics Code. I just think that the way it has to be enforced in a modern society has to be done properly for a modern audience, because if we tried to do it the way it was originally done, too many people would reject it.
We need gun control for a modern audience.
No. But I do think if we're gonna have, let's be honest, comics are for kids. Comics are for kids, man. Comics are for kids.
We need common sense comics control.
Comic sense, comic control.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Well, today our resident contrarian, because if you didn't think I did that job well enough, I brought on the supervillain of the internet, comic book scholar, Captain Cummings, Philip Cummings, to justify and defend that horrid monster, Frederick Wortham. Captain, how are you?
Let's do this!
Yeah.
Oh man, so I'm excited. So now there are two positions on the Comics Code, and Twitless, I've never even, I don't think you and I have ever spoken about the Comics Code, believe it or not.
No, not particularly. I did a little. I know some of what's been said. I didn't do the firsthand research myself, so I actually started a little bit, and I actually started listening to some of the firsthand accounts of, like, for example, Wortham, kind of like what he said in his own words. There's some interesting clips you can find. The funny clip I just showed that I took completely out of context comes from confidential file horror comic books, which I would like to show to you guys, or actually have some of us watch some of it, because it's eye-opening and kind of funny, and I think our audience would get a kick out of it. So no, we haven't really had that conversation yet. It's a part of comics history. It's one that's often talked about. I think it's one that it's talked about so often that people don't go to the source material. They just kind of know it secondhand. They just know, oh, hey, back in the day, there was this bad thing and it was like censorship, right? And censorship is bad, right? And that's kind of the end of the discussion for a lot of people.
I think there are two sides of the argument that I have heard bandied most of my life, and most of them are everything. Censorship is bad. The Comics Code is bad. The Comics Code ruined comics, all kind of together in one clump of stuff, right? And then the other side of it is, well, censorship is bad, but knowing what you're in for and having like some sort of code, it doesn't hurt. And since the Comics Code has gone away, we've had a real dip in comic sales, and maybe the code wasn't bad. And that's the other side of the argument I've heard. And I, however, have come up with a third position.
Of course you have.
I think it's all parlor magic, which I put in the in the advert for the thing. I think it's all it's all fake.
Well, before you have this conversation, not to get too like into the weeds, but I do think it's important to define your terms, especially when you're having a kind of conversation like this.
Oh yes.
So one of the big issues that faces this is there's a lot of underlying principles, I think, and assumptions that people come to the table when they hear something like censorship, right? But it's not people. Some people just think all censorship all the time is bad, without realizing the fact that absolute uncontrolled speech doesn't exist, I think, in any society ever. Your local library will not allow you to look at pornography on the public computers, for example, and you're not allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater, and so on. And so
actually, you are allowed to. That has actually been debunked. But the big issue is when it comes to censorship, and this is my thing.
There has to be a fire.
Well, no.
Well, no, okay. So if I could just finish real fast, the point is that I was trying to make is the fact that the concept when we're talking about something like the Comics Code is that I think it's important to define terms like what is censorship and what is your personal. I guess it reveals a lot of what you think about free speech, about art, about expression. Some people think that artistic depictions do not count as speech. Therefore, things like pornography would not be speech because there's not actually anything necessarily spoken. So like there's different views on it. And so before you even, I think, have that type of conversation, I think it is important to kind of nail down where you're coming from when it comes to what you think about either the concept of censorship or the concept of free expression, because it reveals it's its own kind of it reveals a lot about this type of conversation. Sorry.
Yeah. And Bob, you were going to say?
Oh, I was just pointing out the fact that when you're talking about censorship and whatnot, for adults, like between the four of us, we are all mature, consenting adults who, when we are given information, we should react the way mature adults act. Now, giving that information to, say, a child who does not understand the information you're giving them, that's different. All right. So in my eyes, I view it as censorship is bad, but when we are putting forth material for children, the first thing we should always stress with that material is morality. And that was the big thing that I did agree with the Comics Code Authority was it pushed morality. Now, did it have the reason why they were able to get it out and like get rid of it is because a lot of people use the argument of, well, but it didn't allow you to talk about taboo subjects in certain ways that would be beneficial and helpful. Very true. That's where you go. You don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, though. You go, let's fix this and update it for a modern time. And that's what we need to do. We need to update it for a modern era and bring it back and make it to where we have the ability to say with these things that we are not censoring these stories. We are just saying that there's a time and place for them. And for a product that's predominantly meant for children, let's be honest, yes, we are all lifelong comic fans, but this first and foremost needs to be a space for children to be safe. Let's be honest. And we don't need these comics pushing politics or anything. We just need them to be teaching them that evil is bad and good is good, not to steal, do good for your community, things like that, not economic ideology and gender theory, along with a whole bunch of other things.
I'm not sure if I agree with those exact sentiments, but what you did just say, I think, brings up an interesting point, which is the fact that, back to defining terms, it is important to identify the fact that the Comics Code was not a governmental body. It did not represent governmental censorship. So some people, I think, maybe get fuzzy when they think about like who's exactly in charge of these things. The Comics Code. I'm not talking about you. I'm just saying that I'm talking to our audience.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So yeah, to our audience, the Comics Code and Phil, you could definitely step in with the historian aspect here because you've studied this, but it was a industry self-censorship. Now the government had gotten involved to the point of having hearings And I think there was some mumblings and murmurings about potential legislations. I actually watched one particular senator who was, I think, maybe considering some. But at the end of the day, the comics industry kind of stepped up and did this to themselves. This was an example of self-censorship, which is an entirely different ball of wax than a governmental body saying, you will not put this in your comic books. It was a different sort of thing. Now, people can discuss whether self-censorship is bad or whatnot, but it is important to kind of nail down exactly what the code was and what it was not.
All I got to say is, Mr. Historian, do your thing.
Okay. So there's a lot of misconceptions. People think that, for example, Frederick Wortham was like on the government side, or they were on the comics code side. Frederick Wortham was actually anti-censorship. He actually defended smut magazines being sold, pornography. He was pro-pornography because the audience was directed towards adults. And so he was concerned about comic books that were violent and comic books that were scary. He thought Superman was a fascist because he was so pro-America, and everything with him ended up in violence. His logic, kind of makes sense there, even though it's pretty silly. But he basically wanted, to put the power in the parents' hand, where, you had to be 13 to buy comics, yourself, and anybody younger, the parents could buy the comics for the children. And so a lot of people think he was just with a government stooge, or, because one big thing to realize is the comics code. There was one in the 1940s, I think 1948, or something along those lines, but it wasn't really adhered to that strictly. And then B, after the hearings, the two biggest companies kind of took control of the code, and they'll say they didn't do this, but it basically put the rest of the comic book companies out of business from their rules, because you couldn't get distribution or put your books on the stand without the stamp of approval.
Yep. And one of the things
those
about
two companies were Dell and National or DC Comics.
And I didn't even know this. I knew about, for the most part, everything else, that it was a industry thing. They had it for a while. It just wasn't really doing anything. I never knew that DC and another company took it over, dude. That is wild.
See, and part of the reason for that is that the comic distribution network in the early 50s shrunk immensely, because Fawcett did distribution and they got out of the business because DC sued them into oblivion. Well, that's not entirely true, but it's close enough to true. And the other thing is that National had distribution, Dell did their own distribution, and
American there was a distribution company that was National.
Yeah.
And they were associated with the mob, and they got taken down. So that killed a lot of distribution for magazines.
And real quick, Timely, if I remember right, that's Shazam, right?
No, Fawcett was Captain
Fawcett,
Marvel.
thank you.
Yeah. Timely became Atlas, became Marvel. So.
Yes, thank you.
While we're on the topic of Wortham, I actually sent a link in private chat there, Reese. If you want to pull that up, it's a 2-minute clip, and you get to hear Wortham in his own words. You got to hear this guy speak. He sounds like a supervillain from a comic book, but he's an interesting person. I don't think I judge him as harshly as some others do in comics.
Well, and some people should realize also, he made the convincing argument to the Supreme Court that got rid of segregation in schools.
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely a fascinating individual, very well-educated individual. I think that some of his statements, we can get into this later, some of his statements, there was a debate he had with some other people who were critiquing some of his writings on comics in particular. I think Wortham got a little sloppy in some of his arguments from a rhetorical standpoint when it came to comics, and he did get called out on it. But there's no denying the fact that I think he lectured at MIT. He was a smart guy. So he was not your backyard bigot, as it were, going, comics, get off my
And
lawn.
he's very much a progressive, people should realize too. He's not like some people try to say he's conservative or like a redneck or something, and that's not the case.
No, definitely, yeah. So the clip I pulled up actually has a little bit of Wortham and a little bit of, I think, William Gaines. And the two of them were very important in this debate.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and
So this is the hearings.
Some snippets. Yeah,
let's listen here. Here we go.
The real question is this: are comic books good or are they not good? If you want to raise a generation that is half stormtroopers and half cannon fodder with a dash of illiteracy, then comic books are good. In fact, they are perfect. Just a very short while ago, an 11-year-old boy committed a holdup in California and killed a woman of 42. And when the police came to arrest this 11-year-old boy, his older brother, who's 20, said, if you want to know the cause of all this, here it is. It's these rotten comic books. Cut them out, and things like this would not happen. It is my opinion, without any reasonable doubt, and without any reservation, that comic books are an important contributing factor in many cases of juvenile delinquency.
The Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency had as a prime witness Wortham. Now, as soon as I heard this thing was formed, I asked for permission to appear.
2 decades ago, my late father was instrumental in starting the comic magazine industry. He edited the first few issues of the first modern comic magazine, Famous Funnies.
Famous what?
Funnies. I was the first publisher in these United States to publish horror comics. I'm responsible. I started them. Some may not like them. That's a matter of personal taste. It would be just as difficult to explain the harmless thrill of a horror story to a Dr. Wortham as it would be to explain the sublimity of love to a frigid old maid. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of our own children? Do we forget that they are citizens too and entitled to the essential freedom to read? Or do we think our children so evil, so vicious, so simple-minded that it takes but a comic magazine story of murder to set them to murder, of robbery to set them to robbery?
All right, so before we get struck for song copyright, I will say that Hutt is correct. The guy does sound like a comic book supervillain from a Captain America comic. Also, the comic books.
Oh yeah, he's German too. Realize
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. They are not good for the children.
Yeah,
I think he's very good with his rhetoric. It's very dynamic. If you
he's good at some of that sound biting. I will say William Gaines, who showed up later, was almost, from accounts I have read, was almost single-handedly responsible for his testimony. Although he came out swinging for First Amendment, he ended up kind of dooming the whole project.
And there's a whole story behind that, because he got there early, and then he was supposed to testify, but I guess like Wortham showed up, and so they had him cut in front. And Gaines actually has like diabetes or something, so he hadn't had anything to eat. And then they put him on the stand, and he's all sweaty and shaky, so he wasn't like perfect state at that point.
Right. So the exchange that I remember being really important is the one between him and that particular
senator.
The senator, and the senator kind of really gets him good, as it were, and that's kind of where it's like game over. So rhetorically speaking, there was a particular exchange where Gaines has to basically defend a very violent looking cover that I think has like a beheaded woman on the front. And when you have a public that is kind of having a moral panic, and you're defending a cover where a woman's head is being beheaded, and you're talking about how much blood's on the cover. Essentially, that's the debate you're having. You've kind of lost the argument from a rhetorical perspective, which is where Gaines found himself. So again,
one of the things I put a link in the chat, guys, too. There is a link to an article that the captain wrote for my website. That is an excerpt of some of the original research that captain did, talking about the hearing. And one of the things that came out from captain's research there is the presence of Dr. Bender, if I'm getting her name wrong, right or wrong, I can't remember.
Yeah, that's right. She's the one that came up with the electric shock therapy. And she worked for DC
that's encouraging. That's so encouraging.
But she worked for DC Comics, and part of her job was, making sure that there was some, that the comics weren't too scary. And one of the things that came out of the trial is that she said, well, kids know what they like and what they don't like, and if it's something's too scary for a kid, they won't read it. They move on past it. And they, and that was her statement as a psychiatrist. And so it's funny that, like, I mean, her whole story has been largely forgotten. Like, I'd never heard it. Like, I, grew up as a nerd and hearing about all this stuff. I had never heard that Loretta Bender existed. And so the fact that, there was somebody who had kind of a middle position between, I mean, she was an associate of Wortham. She didn't buy his argumentation. She worked for DC, that whole thing was something that, like, talking about women in comics, why have we never heard about this woman before? It seems like they just want to just ignore. I don't know why it doesn't have outrage points.
I think it's because DC Comics doesn't want to draw anything to this period, because it's like a dark age, and you just rather forget it or whatever. Mm-hmm. Also, I wanted to point out that the Senator Ates Coffier, he was using this to try to gain publicity for, like, a presidential run.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the important things to remember too is that
that's just Coffier.
Yeah. How do I pronounce it?
I don't know. We'll have to check the tape later.
I took a wing at it, but I was probably wrong.
I'm not gonna. I'd have to look at it, and I would probably butcher it. So,
well, a clip. I do want to show some clips. We actually get to hear the good old senator himself. So I got some more stuff for him to take a look at when we have a moment.
Have a second. Okay, we'll get on to that. But one of the things I want to point out too, I did a little bit of research in this period, and Captain was very helpful with me last year, and I actually put an audio. I mean, it's a video essay that is on the channel. You can go check it out. Who Killed the Golden Age? But in the stuff that I went through, one of the things I found most interesting is that the hearing, the Seduction of the Innocent, was printed in 1954. The hearing was actually organized in 1953, right? And so, like, all of these wheels were in motion before Seduction of the Innocent was even published on the stands. And so I think a lot of people give the book entirely too much credit for what was going on, because all of the machine of the industry was already rolling way before Wortham took the stand.
Well, in most situations like that, it's generally, the best way to put it is chicken or the egg situations. A lot of times where you find out, you think one thing happened and you find out another. Like, I didn't know DC was, instrumental in taking hold. I thought that was entirely all the companies got together and was like, set it up, not it was there and took over. So, with the whole, like, Seduction of the Innocent, I never really put much stock in it, because I always heard that there was a lot of crimes that were happening and people were falsely attributing them to comics, not really. And then it was one of those, and then Seduction of the Innocent came out, and that kind of sealed the deals for comics. It was, the things were happening already, then you hear about it. But my whole thing is we always talk about it like it's a bad thing. Like I said, the Comics Code Authority really had a lot of use. It really did push a lot of writers to really think about how could they tell a good story without running afoul of the authority. And I think we need something like that again to kind of revamp the industry, make it very kids focused, and force writers to work around certain blocks and tell stories creatively and use euphemisms and encourage intelligent readers.
So I agree to the point that restrictions often help art. I do agree with that much. I think that the reasons that the code was created were predicated on some very faulty logic and reasoning. There's a really great video. I don't think we have time to watch it, but it's called Frederick Wortham on WNBC Radio, Author Meets the Critic. And there's an excellent exchange. And it boils down to the fact that a lot of people, including Wortham, based their entire argument on the idea, a causal argument, a causal link between comics and delinquent or violent behavior. And that was the crux of the debate. And the counter argument was that comics do not cause anything. And the counter argument, which I think is very fascinating, and it really reveals, again, a lot about what people thought about the issue. There was a person by the name of Virgilia Peterson, who was an author and a small actress. And she came out and basically said, do you think that media has no influence on somebody? Cannot media educate somebody? And if media can educate someone, then it can influence them. And if it can influence them, so she kind of added an extra step there, because I really think that if you're going to boil down, because this is why the code was created. This was the impetus for it. So this argument is a very important one.
See,
and
that's
I think
the part I don't buy. I
don't buy. I mean,
we'll get into that later.
According to the debates, and according to Wortham himself, according to that. So if you want to talk a grander conspiracy, that's fine.
That's the part is Wortham. Wortham wasn't really a part of that discussion, but we'll get into that in a second.
I mean, he was, according to the stuff I've seen. But anyway, so the crux of that debate boiled down to this idea, and again, this reveals a lot about what you think about media. Is to what degree do you think media has an influence upon a person's mind? Because I think it's just as silly to say that that there's a causal link. If I watch a Power Rangers episode, I'm going to go and karate kick somebody, or I'm more likely to karate kick somebody.
Oh, I'm definitely karate kicking.
I mean, go Power Rangers, you mighty morphin Power Rangers.
Okay. And it's one thing to realize that Wortham was not so much saying all children are going to be affected by what they read or something along those lines. No, he's saying like the disturbed ones.
He still think it's a major contributing factor there. And so there's that side of the issue. But I think it's just as silly to also say that what you see, read, and watch has no influence on you at all. Because we very clearly people read things and are influenced in some way. So the line ends up being to what point, or at what point? I think this is the real question. And this is where people really get into this heavy debate. And this is the debate that I think is so fascinating, because very educated people, including Wortham, were having this discussion. At what point does influence create a cause in someone's behavior? And that was the fear ended up surrounding comic books first, but then decades later, when Jack Thompson came around, the whole conversation became about video games, and now it's, the internet essentially. But it's very often, I think, an offshoot of a very similar conversation, which is at what point does an influence become a causal factor in your behavior?
How many times do you watch Morbius before you go?
before you morb out.
I mean, it's Morbid time.
Yeah.
I want to take a break from this conversation for just a second. I have not seen Morbius. I have no desire to see Morbius.
Neither have I. But I don't think any of us have. It's the
immense
memes.
Jump in memes over this has suddenly made me curious, and I kind of hate that. I feel like part of me has died, but I have just a glimmer of curiosity about this movie that I'm sure is utter crap.
Oh, of course.
And yet if I see it for $3 on Black Friday, I might buy it.
What I've heard that people say it's not crap. It's just nothing great either. It's like Blade. It's an MCU vampire movie.
Yeah.
So basically very formulaic and not very good.
Probably less violent though. That's the problem with the vampire movies. If you can't go for the pure violence, you end up.
Well, now we need to see a Blade movie with Mobius saying it's Morbid time.
I mean, right? I mean, come on.
The first,
The jokes write themselves at this point. I'm just saying.
Well,
The simulation is broken.
there was an alternate end cut to the first Blade movie. It's supposed to be Morbius, and like in the post production or of Blade, there's talk of having Morbius be a character in the second Blade, and then they threw that away when Del Toro came on.
Oh,
so thanks, Guillermo. Also, that's the worst movie ever. So absolutely terrible. But enough about the vampire. Well, actually, maybe not vampires.
I was gonna say vampires are germane to this discussion.
Vampires are germane to the conversation.
I mean, my whole thing is though, when you start talking about vampires, it's all good and fun until somebody starts sparkling. I'm just saying.
The funny thing is, the sparkling vampires would be largely okay in a comics code book.
Yeah.
Yes, but I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
Some of the editing that they did, because they would take original art, and if the character looked too like zombie like with too many lines on the face that made them look like a corpse, they would buff that out and make them look much more human in appearance. So the Stephanie Meyer version of vampire, the vision of the much less corpse like human vampire, would actually fly in a comics code book. Sorry for that diversion,
well,
but
for like 5 years, like that's one thing we're Twitless and I were just recently at
I mean, to be fair, can we all be happy that craze is finally done?
The sparkling vampire craze?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, I think South Park did the best joke when dealing with that. You know,
it's not that bad. I mean, it's bad, but it's not that bad.
Okay.
That's
a conversation for some other show.
Okay.
and one where you're objectively wrong. I'm just saying.
Yes.
But no, back onto the matter at hand.
So here's the thing. So we've talked about that restrictions can make art better. But the thing is like there was already, dating back to 47, a comics code that had existed, and Dell never signed on because Dell refused to sign on because they were above all of that nonsense, and they were the #1 publishing comic company from like the late 40s all the way until they closed
because they did funny animal books.
Yeah, did funny animal books. They did movie tie-ins. They did television tie-ins, all kinds of stuff, westerns. And when did I don't remember, when did Dell finally wrap up on stuff?
All right, hold on. Before we go any further, we have our nightly pickle.
Oh, okay.
Mrs. H has delivered our pickle, but she censored it for us. So I'm sad. You're not allowed to be sad. Oh, I'm happy. These are tears of happiness.
I don't want to have tears of happiness. I just want to have tears of sadness.
That's brilliant.
That's amazing. And that was before Spider-Man was created, but quite a bit, but still amazing. Thank you, Mrs. H, for giving us the chuckles. I appreciate it.
I mean, like I said, Spider Pickle is officially, we need to actually add that to like one of our title cards. Spider Pickle is like our official mascot at this point, just by sheer attrition.
Because he does whatever a pickle can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is make a sandwich delicious.
You know what? I'm done with you guys. I'm really, that is hilarious.
So Taylor Gibson said this is the Andrew Garfield Spider Pickle.
I just thought the Tobey Maguire, I thought he was the weepy one.
Oh, I don't know.
Andrew Garfield got such a bad movie. It's unfortunate for him.
Yeah, he was not a terrible Spider-Man. That's another conversation.
Dude, that is not even a hot take, though. Andrew Garfield got hosed, Tommy. He got hosed.
Well, I don't see. Here's the thing: is I suppose that's probably true that he did in fact get
He's
hosed.
Probably the best Spider-Man, but is
because
it the worst movie?
Yeah.
I like Tom Holland. I like Tom Holland.
He's a worse Peter Parker, but he's a good Spider-Man.
Here's the thing. All right, and then we do have to move on. I think you actually, if you wanted the perfect Spider-Man, I think you actually need a piece out of every one of the 3 recent guys. I think you need a piece of Tobey Maguire.
Because Tobey Maguire was the best Peter Parker.
Yeah, you need a piece of him.
Yes.
But he had none of the humor. You needed Andrew Garfield's jokes. He hit the humor part right. And I think Holland brings the youthful vigor and some of the acrobatic qualities that are really great. So it's like if I could put all three of them, yeah, if I could put all three of them into a blender and then get somebody out on the other end, we'd probably finally have an actual.
If you put all three of them in a blender, you'd go to prison.
you would just get Spider Blender.
Yeah,
I'm sure life in prison isn't that bad. I think.
Anyway,
I'm all in favor of the death penalty for multiple murders.
I'm a good
but sir, he made the best Spider-Man. All right, we got to get back to code. We'll never get through this conversation.
So, okay. So anyhow,
right. That's probably why it's
the thing is. Let's get onto my little conspiracy theory about the comics code.
Oh, here we go.
Okay, so let me make sure that my picture is ready. Aha.
You're gonna be like Charlie Kelly with like the Pepe Sylvia. Sylvia. Oh, you don't know the Pepe. Oh my gosh.
Okay, I haven't. Is that the? I think I know the. I think I might know the meme, but I'm not familiar with what the whole thing about it.
Yeah, it's Charlie Day in front of a bulletin board with all of the It's an Always Sunny in Philadelphia reference. Goodness gracious.
See, and I never watched the show. So.
Oh gosh.
Yes, you can call me an
So
uncle.
this is a chart of annual publications from comics.
He broke up the graphs, ladies and gentlemen.
And you'll see
it's just
here.
He's just properly citing his sources. Thank you.
In 1952, there was a peak where comic books of more and more titles got published, and then in 52, it shoots down. It crashes hard.
Does anybody know what happened in 1950s America?
But it was
what did we have in the 1950s that we didn't have in the 1940s?
The technology existed, but it was too expensive for normal people to get, and there was nothing on anyway.
Television, obviously.
Television was huge, and all of a sudden, the exact same material that you could get in comic books, all of the crime, all of the horror, all of the stuff, was all the romance, all of the comedy was free, piped into your house.
Because you had radio before, but I mean that's not as cool.
Well, and you also had the serials that you could watch in theaters and everything.
I do have a counter to this because,
but it wasn't just that. There's also
Estes Kefauver cites this exact reality while he's talking about comics. So yeah, it's in the clip from the confidential file. He actually says a lot of these places are already out of business. So it's despite this, there's still the reality of 60 million comic books being printed every year.
Right.
So that was still used as a huge. It was still having.
He was using
impact.
this. He was trying to soak this out as much as he could for his presidential run, which was going to fail because he was going against a war hero.
Right. That was happening in the background. That being said, when you listen to the guy, he did not come across as a flag waving, cause carrying dude. It's very calm and reserved. I'm just saying that I think it's interesting because a lot of these conversations get addressed.
I think he's from Kentucky, so he's like a Southern gentleman.
I'm just saying he presents his case very calmly.
So is it a John Jackson, or John Johnson, or Johnson John situation? Yeah, I hope I'm getting this right. If you're a Futurama fan, you know what I'm referencing.
I don't.
Oh, basically the he's a clone. Episode of Futurama where they have two literal clones on opposing sides going against each other. That's the joke. Nixon comes in, and that's when he becomes president.
So, moving it back. This is another chart, and the other thing is you see that the number of units moved, the circulation data on Marvel Comics, and there in 52 it spikes up, and then it just crashes. Marvel was doing a thing where they were publishing multiple. They were flooding the market.
They would literally take every gimmick and copy those gimmicks.
Yeah. And they were flooding the market where they were actually producing like bi-weekly and sometimes weekly issues of their comics, getting them out there as fast as possible. And these were horror, these were war comics, these were romance comics, because they were copying what
Where have we
Simon
seen
and
this?
Kirby were doing with romance comics all at the same time. And they were just flooding the market with it. And it honestly, guys, we're seeing a market correction happen. And it doesn't happen at 54. It starts earlier. So I think that what we're having there is that like suddenly we have a market that's crashing, because that's what markets do when they're flooded.
No,
So I have to.
You're not wrong.
Mrs. H is on fire today.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
And the three settings are Holland, Toby, and Garfield.
That's
So
we're never gonna
anyway.
get through this topic. Okay.
So the thing is this here's my setup. I think it's parlor magic, right? There's this public outcry, but it's not commiserate. The level of public outcry is not commiserate with the amount of units being sold, nor is it commiserate with the crash, right? The public outcry started in 42 and then kind of slowly worked its way up. But like the Senate, the House hearings were not put together to address comics. They were to address splatter platters, and they were to address the rock and roll music,
Because they also did rock and roll music and movies as well,
and the movies. Yeah,
it was an attempt to
the Hays
censor.
Code was happening at the same time.
There's another book in the 80s. I forgot what it's called, but it's essentially showing how Congress was able to censor America without actually like changing, breaking the Constitution, because they just did some hearings, got the people to say we want it censored, and then the companies go, okay, whatever, and they do committees and all this stuff, and then they censor everybody.
So I'm going to come at it from the other angle here for just a second, because I think there may be a little bit of some broader context. Mm-hmm. I do think that the outcry was genuine from the corners that were having their outcry, and they had good reason for it. The images that were used in some of these debates, and this is the thing that comics does very well, even before film got good at this, right? Comics was able to portray graphic, violent imagery in static images that were very easily disseminated and very easily gotten a hold of. We didn't have VCRs back in the 50s. Even if you went to a movie theater, you weren't able to necessarily capture a film still unless you went to like what the company and got some of the old film. So like it's not in today's day and era where you could just clip things, right? Right. But comics, when they drew a picture and they had a woman his head was beheaded, and it's en flagrante essentially, and you have her head like dismembered and blood is pouring out. That image for the 1950s is something that people are going to react very strongly to.
It's visceral.
Right, and it's visceral in a way that only comics can do, and it's disseminated in a way that only comics can really get, and that other mediums will not catch up to for several decades. So I think that the people who were reacting to it, because I've listened to some of these clips of that woman I mentioned, Virgilia, right. She is incensed, and she is talking very particularly about images, and she's not just going like, there's no conspiracy in her mind. She literally thinks these things are bad for kids.
So once again,
most of these people are genuine in thinking these are bad.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not what I'm talking about, right? Because there's two sides of it. Like the Congress didn't really censor it, right?
They knew they couldn't.
They couldn't. The hearings went on a while, and they just said, "Guys, could do this. Get this out of our way." Right?
Yeah.
My understanding is they actually ended the whole hearings early. They put out their report. Probably there was elections going on, all kinds of stuff too, but. But that wasn't the story. You got to like look at the like all of that stuff, like slap on it. They even tried like making it look, because of the way that the companies were structured. They laid it out like they were, you guys are some sort of like mob. You're some sort of, you're trying to get out of, and they absolutely were. Most of the big comic companies were backed by the mob, so this isn't a big shock. But every little like property has its own, like, corporation, so they can hold on.
Yeah,
to the
people
property.
didn't know, like, Marvel changed their name multiple times so they could get around paying taxes.
See, I did not know that. That's awesome to find out.
So like so what was going on in my perspective is that what was going on in Congress was, hadn't had anything to do with what actually ended up happening with the comics. Because one of the suggestions is that what Wortham was suggesting wasn't a comics code, because he didn't think that would work.
Yeah, he wanted children to have their parents buy the book.
And that's something that's mentioned by the confidential file, is that what's discussed is even Estes Kefauver says flat out, he says, I do not believe that legislation is the real answer here. He says the real answer is for basically the market. He says if people come together in their local communities and decide to band against this content, then it won't be sold. And so he actually targets, and this is something I did appreciate from him, because he did not say, I want this bill, everyone vote for my bill. He says the real solution here, just like I said, gave me a little respect for him. He said the real solution is for local communities and governments and people and parents, the real power of the people to basically exercise their God-given rights to say no to the content.
Well, and the insidious bit about that is it had already happened in Chicago before this, where the librarians had gone in and had ginned up had picketed and had done all sorts of stuff to the city council, where it was practically impossible to buy a comic in Chicago. So thanks, Chicago, for another crappy thing.
I mean,
also,
yeah, but
and also librarians.
No. This is Chicago we're talking about. Nothing good comes out of Chicago.
You maybe bring my wife on stream here to defend the librarians.
But is your wife in favor of librarians censoring other businesses because they don't get a cut? Because that's the question.
That's not exact. That's a little cynical. The librarians, because I know some of the librarian arguments. I've read some of them.
Yeah,
they were very much in terms of taste making. They were like, ooh, comics. Ooh, you should actually be reading literature.
Yeah, like Goodnight Moon.
Goodnight Moon.
The children's picture book market started partially because is an answer to the comic book industry. Or at least the modern version of it and some of the modern movements of it.
Would this be like Dr. Seuss?
Well,
not necessarily Dr. Seuss. This was Steve Mulligan and his magnificent steam engine and stuff like that. There was particular books, Caldecott and other winners, medal winners that were part of a push.
Chicago did give us the coolest gangsters.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so one of the things, like I said, back to what was going on in comics at the time, right? In 1952, Fawcett lost, or they finally settled on the fourth copyright infringement suit against that DC had filed against them for Superman versus Captain Marvel,
which
right?
is pretty much acknowledged that DC only did it because they were jealous.
Because Captain Marvel was doing Superman so much better.
It was actually good compared to Superman.
And the sales were insane. They were Fawcett Comics before Dell's ascendancy. Fawcett Comics was the #1 distributor of comic books through most of the 1940s.
Because Otto Bender had like a whimsical style of writing that was quirky and funny, and also he did like long-term writing storylines in the golden age where you really didn't even see that going on usually.
Captain Marvel versus the Monster Society of Evil, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, so
Jeff Smith did a modern revision of which reimagining of which
it'll be here this weekend.
It's a lot of fun. Mrs. H again on fire. Neostar. This is a flying pickle as he gets fired out of a jar.
That is hilarious.
These are brilliant.
It's amazing.
No, may I say though, I have to ask, what did y'all think of the Shazam movie?
I thought it was all right.
I hated it.
It was better than the comics it was based on, but it still missed a lot of the whimsy that made Captain Marvel awesome.
I mean, I thought it was pretty good. I liked it.
Name, other than
I think it was utter tonal dissonance. You have a film that's basically targeted at like children, because Captain Marvel, much more than Superman, is definitely targeted at youngsters. Either right at the cusp of adolescence, essentially, or kind of pre-adolescence. And you have in that movie that you're targeting at that exact audience and demographic, you have graphic gargoyle-looking nightmare demons that like eat people, and it's like, what is this? Who is this for? And it's the film. I don't think the movie knows who its audience is.
I don't know. I think if my kids were, my kids enjoyed it. They're grown, but I think if they were young, they still would have liked it. I think it's just scary enough. But.
I don't know. Like I said, I think Tony.
I think it could have been funnier, but
yeah,
overall, I thought it was good.
Yeah.
Savannah comes across like more of a serial killer than an actual like supervillain. It's like I said, death to Tone.
My big problem was the whole like Savannah like is totally. I mean, that was Jeff Johns' Savannah. They did a pretty good job of doing Jeff Johns' Savannah, but Jeff Johns' Savannah is not Dr. Savannah.
I'm okay with a slight change on him, but I feel like
a slight change.
That's what I'm saying. Like I'm okay with a change, and I think is it Mark Strong? Mark Strong's great at playing bad guys,
and Mark Strong's performance wasn't bad.
It's fine. It's just
instead of being like this crotchety old man who's like whose science will take over the world. Instead, is this like whiny son who didn't get mommy and daddy's attention right,
and he's also kind of like a serial murderer. And then and by the end of that movie, in the after credits sequence, they are introducing Mr. Mind, which was actually spot on. He was perfect.
Yeah.
But it's like, again, it's like tonally, I'm like, what am I watching? Like, I feel like I'm in tonal whiplash.
It's the Snyderverse.
Savage TV says, "Twitless. I know kids who watch horror movies.
Yeah, I did too. I did too. But before a certain age, they are very traumatizing, depending on the film you watch.
There's movies I haven't watched since I was a child, like horror movies, and then I watch them now, and I'm like, why was I so scared?
I watched Fright Night way more than I should have. I had daymares for a month, is all I'm saying.
Well, we won't talk about that anyway. So.
Okay.
Moving on just a little bit onto the thing here. Where was I? Think again. Oh, I was back to going about Captain Marvel, Fawcett Comics. When Fawcett Comics agreed to stop publishing Captain Marvel, there was a time frame on it. They ended up 54 was when they closed up shop entirely, and they got out of the distribution business, all that kind of stuff. One of the reasons they shuttered their entire comics line. They quit selling comics entirely at that point, and part of it was they had just developed the direct-to-paperback novel, they called the Red Badge novels, and all of the and they had some horror and some crime comics too, but they just transitioned their adult audience into paperback novels, and they had invented a new medium of mass market trade paperbacks, direct to.
Fawcett's always been pretty much ahead of the game. It seemed like.
Good God.
That was like the third transition they did.
Yeah. I mean, it was. And they just and then they were so they basically just shoved off this silly comic thing behind them. And I kind of think that if there's a closing date to the golden age, it's really Fawcett Comics saying we're not making comic books anymore. And there was
instead of the Flash or whatever.
Yeah, I mean that would be if the Flash came on to start something new, that was 2 years later. Also interesting, by 56, every company that was still making comics had their own horror line. So they just didn't call it that anymore.
All right, so back to the code.
Back to the code.
Back to the Pirates code.
So here's the thing is, so after the big runabout...
It's more of guidelines?
It's more like guidelines. Yeah. I forget who it is, but somebody on the... I think it might have been Wortham, points out that examples of post-code non-compliance.
That is hilarious.
Sure.
I mean, it is Pride Month, so we're on brand.
So anyway, the thing is after and this is something I want to go ahead and do a share screen on to share this thing of me here. And I'll just read it, talking about this whole thing here. Give me just a second. Where'd it go?
Yeah, if you look at the Wikipedia page, they said some of the publishers included Dell, Western, and Classic Illustrated never used it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So here's the thing.
Well, Dell didn't have to because they published Animal Comics.
Well, no, they had all sorts of stuff too. And the other thing about back to Wortham a little bit before I read this thing is that after the Senate hearings, after the Comics Code, Wortham tried ginning up stuff again to say, no, Western comics are crime comics. You're missing the point. It's all of the violence. It's all of the violence. And nobody listened to him.
Well, he tried to publish a book about movies as well. But the thing about Seduction of the Innocent is even today, like a lot of these comic guys try to make it out bigger than it was. I don't think that many people bought that book. Like, I think it was something like, you know, like
I feel like people I feel like
it and reviewed it, and then it created.
I feel like
bigger, but nobody actually really read it.
I was gonna say I feel like people bought it and then it sat on their shelf. It was one of those things. I have this book written by a German genius psychologist, and have you read it? Well, I read the foreword.
I think it's one of those things where it came on, and like it was in his bio when they read him into the record in Congress, and everyone's like, "That's who we have to be angry at." So here's the thing.
Well, I even think that Congress might have chose him for that on purpose.
Yeah. I think so too. And I mean, he had been spoken in the he was first published in the anti-comics movement in 1948, but he didn't have his actual book until later. But here we go. Listen to this. This is from an interview from William Gaines he did in 1983, the Comics Journal. After the subcommittee hearings, he says, after the Senate subcommittee hearings, this isn't very well known, but I can prove it again. I sent a letter to every comics publisher and invited them to a meeting and footed the bill for the hall. We took a big place somewhere, and all of these people showed up, and I tried to convince them that we should form an association and hire the Glukes of Harvard or anybody else to come and find who could do some sort of independent, honest research into whether comic books, in truth, were the horrendous things that people said they were. And since I really didn't think they were, I figured this study would exonerate us. None of these guys wanted to do that, and right away the whole thing was taken away from me, and they turned it into a situation where they wrote the code, and the code forbade the use of the word horror, terror, or crime. This was all of my books. And weird, even weird. So that would wipe me out. So I didn't join the association, but then I decided to drop all those books anyway, put out the New Direction stuff. I put out 6 issues and right? So the thing is...
Yeah, according to William Gaines, the whole thing was basically a mafia move to take him out of business. Right. I don't know how much stock I put in it's his account.
Right.
There's probably some truth to it, but he's clearly
right.
Biased on that side.
He used the words that were directly in the titles of his books.
Yes. And the other thing about it is like the two people that headed up the effort were Dell, who never used the code, and DC, who owned the distribution.
Dell was
rights.
super pissed that they were being associated with these books because they made children's stories.
So I think.
So Dave,
I think
America outlawed booze and confiscated everyone's gold. Comics got it
easy. If I were to kind of like sum up, I would say it's probably column A, column B. You know, like the underhanded shenanigans of these publishers, I think are pretty well documented. We've seen there's a long history of it. So to say, oh no, in this case they were all pure and innocent, would be like, yeah, sure, why? Probably not.
Right. Well, DC had just wiped out their only real competition for their market.
That being said, I think ascribing it only to that, I think is also would be mistaken.
Well, it could be like multiple different things at the same time.
Exactly.
There's a bunch of people at play here, and they all have their own motives.
Exactly. That's where my opinion is. My opinion is that it's a confluence of things that included some of those typical mafia underhanded industry tactics mixed with the the genuine concern of parents and lawmakers and people who don't want to see, their children's minds polluted. Also the fact that comics still had the unique quality of being able to preserve graphic imagery and very easily, whereas, like I said, film and TV were not going to catch up for another couple of decades.
Right.
So I think when you mix all of that in a blender, you get the comics code and the outcry that you saw.
And the biggest problem is the losers are obviously the publishers that went under. And then the people that liked reading those comics that now just aren't there because we got to censor them for the children.
Well, now they can buy Mickey
most of
books from Fawcett.
Probably weren't even being read by the children.
Phil, I'll even add to that, and I'll say that even greater loser, because I was at a conference where my mentor was talking a little about Gaines and about EC Comics and so on, and he ended up, one of the things he mentioned, this kind of stuck in my mind, is he said that a lot of the artists, the real losers were the artists, because there were artists who drew EC horror and crime comics, and then after EC Comics went under, they never went back to comics. They went into advertising, they went into marketing, they went into other fields of art. And so there was maybe, years and years and years of material we never got from some of these, great artists, great sequential artists, storytellers, and they just abandoned the art form. So I think that's the real mournful part of this.
And a lot of them, most people don't know about because the Golden Age isn't as well known as, the Silver Age.
Right, exactly. So, and that's what my professor was kind of somber about, is he was like, there's this entire cadre of, important, great sequential artist storytellers, and, we don't hear about them, and we never heard from them again because of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's a fair statement. But one of the thing I want to get at, back to the code itself, right? So as we dial it back a little bit, Twitless and I were just at an academic comic book conference, and one of the presenters was talking about the code and censorship and female bodies.
Yep.
And I don't want to get into her whole argument, but one of the things that she noticed in her she did a survey of a couple of titles from
specifically Wonder Woman, I think is who she was.
Wonder Woman and Action Comics with Lois Lane on the covers.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, Lois Lane
from 1950 to 1960. I think maybe a little bit beyond, but those were the featured years. And she said that there was an intentional restriction in the code against sexual imagery, and how did that play out against things? She had this whole thing, and then she said, and after 1960, there really weren't any rules anymore. I'm like, huh. So it's just
like they forgot.
It was enforced just long enough to drown out your competition. So yeah, there you go. Maybe it's a conspiracy theory. Maybe I'm some sort of crazy right-wing nutcase. Who knows? But I think that it was way more nefarious than anyone wants to talk about.
I mean, it's plausible. It's plausible you present a valid argument to where it could be, legitimate.
This is getting really deep. We're starting to get real deep pickle lore.
We're in quite a pickle.
Wow, this is the Tobey Maguire version of Spider Pickle. This is too deep. This is some real catharsis going on right here.
Are we reaching pickleception?
So, not
quite. We're reaching pickle verse is what's happening.
We're getting really close. Yes. Earlier, somebody was asking when does the pickle verse get here? I'm like,
listen, Morty, you don't want to go to the pickle verse. It's a bad place, Morty. It's full of pickles of superheroes. It's a bad thing, and it really is just a lot of pickles everywhere, and they run around, Morty. They run around fighting each other.
I think some pickle bodies started in the 70s, but
yeah, I think it was like 73, but
which is basically when there was no code anymore. I mean, essentially. Well, that's not true, because even like Todd McFarlane complains about like him stabbing a bad guy in the eye, and they made him redraw it, so he was pissed.
Well, yeah, the code I think existed up to 2011 technically.
Yeah. But I mean, the enforcement mechanism wasn't there so much
It was like
And the other thing about it is, by the 60s, right? There were several people who published, books without the code symbol on it, and it still got through distribution because,
they didn't really care at that point.
They didn't care that much anymore, right?
And what's weird is, if you think about it, it's just people reading these books every month. So they get to read comic books every month for free, and then change random things if they want to.
Well, and that was the other thing from that gal's presentation is, I guess, the censors for the Comics Code for the first 5 years were all women.
Yeah, that was an important point to bring up, was the fact that there was a cadre of women who were.
It's just these Karens who were in there telling people.
Laura Bender was in the Comics Code, the first one. I don't know if she was in the 1954 one or not.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I need to speak to your manager, please.
Well, you are the manager, ma'am.
It was more like, I need to speak to your artist, is essentially what it was.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's the thing is, now I was back around. We've talked about my conspiracy theory. We've talked about a thing, and we've talked about how the Comics Code could be a good thing. I think some of that comes down to editorial control too. I think that the editors at companies need to understand their audience, which is something that I feel that nobody has known their audience since Denny O'Neil retired.
I would need to read the rules again, but I don't think I agree that it's a good thing. I don't like it at all.
It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be wrong.
There was also an updated version in '86, I think, too, that allowed for different stuff.
It allowed for chopping up women and putting them in refrigerators.
Yeah, well,
one time that happened. One time,
and it's fine as long as it's implied. Also, if the Queen of Hearts, drills a person's chest cavity out, it's fine if
that's an interesting question. Do you think Gail Simone would be okay with a Comics Code as long as it was like a feminist one?
Of course.
I think Gail.
I can do anything I want, but if you're a male, you cannot put women.
You can't put women in refrigerators. Yeah. That would be a funny little code via.
All I gotta say is Gail Simone is sitting somewhere. Why do they keep bringing up the refrigerator? I'm so tired of it.
Well, that's what she made her bones on.
All right, Gail's not crying. I'm sorry. She made a very lucrative career on that.
Yeah, but now she's tired of hearing about the damn fridge. She's like, I've long since moved on from here. Let it go.
She's too busy laughing at putting sex jokes into kids' comics.
I mean, you're not wrong.
So anyway, because I didn't come here to talk about Gail Simone.
I just made on March. Chat's running around. Chat's running away with the Gail Simone thing. What have we done?
Yeah, still mad about the Killing Joke. I'm still mad about the Killing Joke. That was a crap story.
I think a half of Batman fans are still mad about the Killing Joke.
I was just thinking about how a beheaded woman could easily become a feminist argument with some tweaks. Let's just not.
I'm curious which tweaks you're discussing. What are the nature of these tweaks?
Somebody immediately
Taylor
posts a
says,
picture of tweak.
are we going to get the insane story of how the code ended, right? Well, basically, one by one, comic publishers stopped paying their dues until only DC was left. DC and Bongo. And if I remember right,
we started this, we're going to ride it out.
And then DC was like, I think we're done. And then Bongo was like, we're done? Okay.
I think Taylor was referencing the famous Stan Lee kind of like line in the sand, essentially. At least the way. See, the thing is that again, because it's Stan Lee, he makes everything about like when I did it, it was the most important time that it was ever been done.
Showman. He's like the Hogan of comics.
You gotta get his voice,
but it's also like BS at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's enough fabrication in.
And you gotta get his voice. You gotta get that deep Stanley rasp. It's like when I did it, it was ethical. Marvel was at a turning point, a crossroads. I was like, you know what? Let's do this. We're gonna move the code from the books. Then books are gonna fly off the shelf. And everyone was plotting. There was unicorns in the air, all because of me, Stan Lee.
Maybe.
Yeah, when Stan Lee did something, it had never been done before, and he did it the most amazing way possible, and it's never been done the same way since. According to Stan Lee.
A year and a half later, DC did the same thing. So,
yeah, because they were following his lead.
Yeah.
Even if they weren't, they were.
Yeah. Which, there is some truth to that. I mean, let's be completely honest. I mean, we had the Stan Lee conversation with Doug Ernst.
I know he's important. I'm just saying that, like, you always have to take a little grain of salt there.
Something. Well, yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things about. And actually, Roy Thomas has talked about it. He was being interviewed by Dan Fraga, I think it was a while back ago. And he was talking about how the thing is like everybody knew that Stan was telling stories. That's what Stan did. That's what his whole life was, telling stories. Mm-hmm. So everything about the Marvel bullpen, everything like that was like, yeah, there was real things that happened, but
a lot of it was made up.
A lot of it was made up, or it was exaggerated, or it was given a funny twist or a spin because he's a storyteller. He's telling stories. But the thing is, I think that looking back at comic history, almost all of these sacred cow things are the same way, because everybody involved is a storyteller, right? So they're going to be sitting around, with scotch or beer or whatever, telling stories, and so they have to make Wortham the villain. They have to make the Senate, instead of it being a Senate committee, they have to make it the HUAC, right? But no,
I'm trying to remember. I don't think Stan was too uncharitable to Wortham when I've read him. He was more like, "Who is this weirdo?" More
in his book, he said he debated him, which was not true. But I mean, I debated maybe in your mind or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe he also said there's an interesting tidbit with Stan Lee. He said he won a writing contest in the newspaper in high school 3 weeks in a row, and in the last biography I read by him, the guy went through all the newspapers that specific newspaper, went through every week of that newspaper and didn't find him named once, nor that any
special mention
contest that there would have been to win.
Yeah.
So he had a lot of stories.
Big fish tales, very big for. I mean, like the whole bullpen is just a magical construct he invented.
And to be honest, like I think a lot of people before the internet were storytellers in that fashion. A current politician that we know likes to tell a lot of stories that are debunked later.
More than one.
Do you know how little that narrows it down?
I mean, I was saying our commander in chief, but
okay. I was gonna say you say politician who lies, and I'm like, I think.
Well, I'm not saying lies, but he'll distinctly tell a story like it's true, and then later they'll be like, the person that was with him or something will be like, no, that
happened to somebody else.
Listen here, Fat. You're spreading misinformation, and I'm gonna have to get Corn Pop here to handle you, and you get my point, son. I'll take you out back to the woodshed.
Let's leave Corn Pop out of this. I'm sure at this point his reputation has been thoroughly trounced, and he can't even go back to the pool anymore.
All right, Savage T. Reed brings up a good point I'd like to address, so we could highlight that comment. He says, it sounds like comic book people are doing to Wortham what Hollywood has done to McCarthy and the House of Un-American Activities Committee. Mm-hmm. I would say, I think that's half. I would half agree with that. Wortham said enough stuff that was, I believe, flawed, that you can, in fact, debate him on the merits of his own points that I think are mistaken. There's an excellent video. Frederick Wortham meets the critic. And a guy pulls out his own text, reads out his own words, and kind of says, "Hey, Wortham, you're wrong here." He says you're making a causal link between comics and delinquent behavior, and yet your own psychological and psychiatric work essentially says that that's not how psychology works. That psychology is a confluence of factors. A lot of it has to do with the home life of the child. It's not like I read a comic and you become a murderer. Now, there is still a debate to be had, again, about when the influence becomes when that may cross a line. But a lot of the research that I'm aware of, at least, that tends to look at media, tends to tends to say that no, media does not cause behavior. But that being said, we all know that, you know, we have stories that do leave impact on us, so influence on some level is still present. So that's where I think that debate is. But
could you say that let me think about this for a second. Could you say Dave Chappelle was attacked because Will Smith smacked a comedian on TV?
I think I am a firm believer
not because
not because, but he did. It's one of those people. It goes back to the whole how a mob is formed. It's not one person just goes, "I'm angry," and everyone goes, "Yeah." It's a group of people are already angry, and one person pushes the boundary, then the next person pushes.
There was a mob that was angry that Chris Rock made a joke.
So my problem,
it's Will Smith doing that pushed the boundary of what was acceptable. So now, of course, since Will Smith, who Jada Pinkett Smith being on the woke spectrum to say the least, has basically opened the door and made it acceptable socially to attack comedians for their jokes.
I think it's a little more involved than that, but I definitely think that that being present in the zeitgeist has an effect.
And that's the problem, is that people are debating whether or not that effect is something that you should. Because here's the debate, right? Here's the ethical quandary. If an effect can be predicted, does someone have a responsibility to do something about it? And that is my problem with that line of reasoning. My problem with that line of reasoning is what led to the code in the first place, is that people were afraid and said comics might or could, or sometimes we think they do, either exacerbate or inflame violence to being more violent, or they tempt people who are predisposed to violence to being violent, or even more so. Like I said, there's some clips that actually just say comics just teach you how to be a violent person. So the thing is that once you start adopting that type of thinking, you basically place a moral and ethical impetus and responsibility and onus upon fiction. And I do not personally believe that fiction. I'm very hesitant to place a ethical responsibility on fiction, because what that basically does is it tells you as a storyteller what you can and cannot do, and then if someone does something wrong, people start looking at you as if you're the responsible one for making a made-up story. And this is what leads to a lot of, I think, current debates, because they're not about violence anymore. What they are now about, what they're about. Now, let me finish real fast. What the current debate now isn't about violence. The current debate is these comics with sexual depictions make men misogynist. Therefore, we need to use social justice art, and it's almost like a code, but just not with the full force of the code. And instead of violence being the thing that's looked at as being caused, it is sexism, which is the thing that's being looked at that is caused by the comic book. But again, the philosophical underpinning here is still an assumption that says that fictional storytelling has an ethical responsibility to its readership and audience, and I have big reservations on that.
It does to an extent, but you're making broad generalizations that of one general thing, that the parents are actually there. See, if the parents are actually there, then yes, like my parents made sure I knew the difference between reality and fiction and so on and so forth. But if you have kids that are just being shoved in front of a TV, getting comic books thrown in front of them, you know, a video game or whatever, they're not being properly raised by an adult to understand that this is a fictional thing, this is not something that is real, then yes, you do need to step up and be like, if the parents are going to treat us like we're the ones teaching morality to the children, then we have an ethical responsibility to have actual proper good Judeo-Christian morals being taught to these kids. And while I may not necessarily agree with the idea of social justice art in the sense of making women ugly to destroy the male gaze, I do, on the other hand, agree with the idea of women being properly dressed and of not, like, while they are still attractive, they are not flaunting their assets, which is, and you know, we are teaching young men that while it may be natural, it is not appropriate to look at women with lustful thoughts. But that is once again a parent's job. But when the parents aren't doing their job, then and they're just shoving media in front of these kids' face, then the media needs to reflect the values that society wants instilled in their children. And we are still a Judeo-Christian society.
I don't know. I feel like
the parent, I would argue that if the parents are pushing the media in front of the kid's face, then they're the ones parenting. They've already made their choice.
And I'd like to think that, like, I don't think,
and most kids aren't going to like get warped that bad. I mean,
right.
I watched horror movies all through my childhood, and I'm only slightly demented.
Yeah, okay, I'm only slightly nuts. Okay.
But the point I'm making is, though, is responsibility when it's not being properly, handled by the parents and being shoved off onto these other groups, i.e. the entertainment industry, then you need to have things in place that maintains that the entertainment industry is going to have entertainment that is properly, if you will, in line with the parents' beliefs.
Right. So, but here's part of the thing I'm going to come back to. And this
you're
is
making. I'm going to say.
I've got up here. All right,
okay.
up here. See, Mrs. H has got the perfect comment. Kids have been properly raised since school became compulsory.
You're not wrong.
And that's the thing, right? So, like it doesn't matter whatever entertainment kids are involved in. Nothing is going to undo those 7 hours a day in school for 9 months out of the year.
Okay, so then you're going back to like almost the foundation of the country, to like the old Deluder Satan Act.
Actually, school wasn't compulsory nationwide until this century.
I'm not talking about nationwide. I'm talking about the fact that like compulsory school has existed since like the Puritans. Maybe not on a federal level or whatever, but like in communities, it was a thing. Like I said, there was
like the first state to make it compulsory was Massachusetts in the 1830s.
There were acts that were literally like old Deluders, like literally like references to combating Satan were in like the legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So
school, like part of the Midwest, the Northwest Ordinance, which predates the Constitution, allowed for to the north territories to required territories to set apart a certain amount of money for education. But the point
I want to make is that I don't think it's compulsory school itself that's the problem. I also think that saying things like, blaming the parents as a class, while true, I think ignores a broader spiritual problem. It wouldn't matter if kids had to go to school or not if you had a state of like Great Awakening revival in a country where people were basically, their hearts were turned to God, essentially. So we're going to go to the Christian if we're going to the Christian argument, it's not about parents X or parents Y. It's about whether or not the nation has turned its heart to God or not.
And I'm all for that. Do it. Come on.
But that's not something you can legislate. That's something that has to come from
an argument that you would say.
But you can't.
50s.
Come on, Bob. Let Captain talk.
And a lot of the child delinquency that we've seen, a lot of it was from parents that were killed in the war.
Mm-hmm.
So they grew up without father figures. And then they, went to a life of crime.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like if that were the case, I feel like if that were the case, then after the Civil War, we would have had like
we did.
There was a lot of bad stuff happening.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying that like
after the Civil War, after the Spanish-American War, after World War One, after
the Civil War would have been worse. I think we lost more in Civil War than we lost in like in any other.
No, we did. But I'm just saying, like there were spikes in youth crime. I mean, like that's when the Old West happened. But so that was. I mean, those are trends.
And society was just extremely violent then.
Yeah,
it's when you're talking about a lot of what was going on, like in these periods after conflict, you always have this, if you will, directly after you generally see a period of strife socially because you're still readjusting from the loss of a great number of, if you will, marriage and aged men. But once things start to level off, you generally have a golden age immediately after. Generally, if you look throughout history, unless the entire society collapses like you had with like Rome or, several other, if you will, empires throughout time. But
Rome didn't really collapse, but that's a different story.
It kind of imploded in on itself is the best way to put it. I wouldn't say it collapsed.
Apart.
Yeah, it literally did.
Most people would call that a type of collapse.
Yeah. No, but like the actual day-to-day life of the people didn't really change.
I mean, well, not for a while. And then definitely.
Oh, it really didn't though. Anyway.
Well, yes and no. This is one of those you can go into the.
That's not the point of the show. Let's move on.
But history. We gotta love the history.
The Dark
Ages back to the
on.
code. I do have some fun clips that I think give some context here. So I sent a link. I would skip to 6. If you want to listen to Estes Kefauver, but he's kind of boring. So I would skip to.
Awful.
I would skip to 6 minutes in because that's when it gets good, and that's when the guy starts talking about the comic book threat, which is I think something that our audience would love.
Okay. So we're going to drop that into here. I'm going to full screen this puppy.
This is from Confidential File Horror Comic Books by Paul Coates. And it's kind of like a evening television expose on this thing that is going to destroy your kids.
But you're watching it on television, so they're already not writing comics. Okay. Hang on. No, that's not what I meant to do.
Tell me what you meant to do.
Hit the wrong button again.
You're wrong button.
Okay.
Stick to the code. I like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would start it at 6 minutes in.
What on earth happened here? 6 minutes, you say?
Yeah, about 6 minutes is I
think. 6
minutes. The guy with glasses. Oh, it's the confidential.
Ask 10 kids where they.
Hang on. I think I may have forgotten to do the audio with it.
There's a little bit of echo I can hear.
Yes.
It makes it better.
Echo.
It makes it better.
That gives us that 1940s, 1950s feel.
It does, actually. A little.
Oh, Taylor's got the hot take in the chat that I'm not going to address. He's not at all wrong, but we're just not going to talk about that right now. Ah, crap, I did it again. This is the best TV show on the internet. Let's not forget.
Boomer Tech in 3D.
I mean, I was doing my thing with the newfangled TV, but I couldn't figure out how it worked, so I got my grandson over here. He called me a boomer and just told me to Google it. What's a Google?
You sound like Hank Hill. That's a nice Hank Hill impression.
If you want me to do a proper Hank Hill, do not just say do a proper Hank Hill. I will do you a Hank Hill. I will tell you that boy ain't right while saying that my daddy had some issues after he had done fought in World War II.
That's even better.
Okay.
Dude, you guys have no idea. All I do is sit around and have fun, trying my best to do different voices just because I can, and I'm really bored half the time. So
Cotton Hill fought on both fronts.
Listen here, I don't care who you think you are. I don't care what you think you're doing. Now I got my boy. He's got the urethra thing. I ain't giving him no other children on that there Bobby boy. But I will say though, if you want me to talk about my war stories, you best be ready to get me a bit on the tipsy side. If you know what I'm saying.
Okay, here we go. Is it sharing? No, it's not. Oh my gosh.
And I mean, I can keep going if you want. I mean, I'm sure.
Apparently, it's going to take Reese another.
I don't even understand what the heck just happened here. Okay, share. Click the thing, the thing. Okay,
there we go.
There we are.
Where they got the comic book they're reading. Maybe one or two will tell you they bought it. The rest traded for theirs.
They traded them.
They buy one book and they read 10. It's wonderful economics, but unfortunately it means that 10 times as many kids read books they never should even see.
It's just like when you buy a
economic or
gun
racial.
outside the store.
They reach every strata. You read them in the North and in the South.
No race is safe.
Stories like The Human Hyena.
That sounds amazing.
Stories like Time to Die.
Once again,
they read them in alleys in Manhattan. They read them in tree houses. They read them tucked into their notebooks in classrooms. And at night they dream about them. One glance is enough to tell you that this boy just got out of school for the day.
Well, that's true. That's true. I do dream about comic books.
Yeah, me too.
Why shouldn't he be happy? Until supper time, he can do anything he wants to do. He's free.
He can do anything
he
he
knows
wants.
exactly how he'll while away the hours. He'll spend a nice, quiet afternoon with a comic book. I think it's important to note here that the comic book wasn't just an anti-boredom measure. He could have played baseball, but he chose the comic book
Good
instead.
little kid.
You and your literacy.
Yeah.
Yes, because we all run through everything to read
This
our
is the
comic
hideout,
books.
the secret place where the gang, and I mean
Piece of
gang with
cardboard.
good sense, a group of pals,
Kids today have their
hangs
secret
out after
hideouts.
school.
Back in my day, we had our porn right out in the open.
It's part of growing up. It's the environment in which you learn to cooperate with your peers without interference from authority.
They're just trashing the resale value on those things.
Problems come up and you have to handle them yourselves.
Wait, no, so that kid's like, he just slugs the other guy. He's not wanting to read his book. He doesn't want to.
Oh, it gets better. It gets better. This is magic.
No, Bobby. Last time you touched my comic books, you got jam and some other white sticky stuff all over the pages. I mean, I'm not letting you read any more comics. And why did you walk off with it, too? Like, you disappeared behind that bush for a while.
We store our comics on the dirt, just like the pros do.
When I was a boy and played with the gang, we did a lot of things. We roasted potatoes, went on expeditions, we tipped over garbage cans now and then. We wrote nasty remarks about the teacher on the sidewalk.
That's a lot more antisocial than just sitting around reading.
We made misogynist remarks.
We never spent an afternoon sitting around like this, reading. What a wonderful thing this would be if they were reading something worthwhile, something that would stimulate their desires to build and to grow.
They need to read Atlas Shrugged.
Everyone
But
does.
they're not reading anything constructive. They're reading stories devoted to adultery, to sexual perversion, to horror, to the most despicable of crimes.
They're rolling them up and sticking them in their back pockets.
The corpse that came to dinner. One of the wonderfully appealing things about children is that they haven't yet come to the age where reality and unreality are divorced. The emotional impact
like
of
Mom and
something
Dad.
they read in a comic book may be much the same as a real-life situation
Looks
they
like
would.
Daddy's been drinking too much again.
This one's a poem. I think you should hear it. The draining rain sprays the pane tenderly.
That's
The
nice.
whistling wind winds round the weeds tenderly. And I come to you with arms out wide and one thought inside of me. So I take your lips, I take your heart tenderly.
Wow.
Maybe
I like
you
how
can
it
accept
shaped like
this fact,
an
maybe
actual
not.
cartoon heart.
That was amazing. Hey, I see. Here's the thing I don't get. I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna have a little bit of a rant here, just for a second.
I don't want to go on a rant here.
Well, you're pausing it before the best part, though.
Oh yeah. I'll get back to that. I'll get back to that.
All right.
Hey, so here's the
I'll
thing:
have
is
another rant
that's
after
that's a moral lecture. Listen, don't date crazy. That's an important. Kids today don't know that.
I don't know. That lecture's kind of hard to read behind that that C cup that's on display.
That's
the most important crazy to avoid, Twitless.
I feel like I'm getting. I feel like I'm getting mixed messages.
No. All jokes aside, that was some really good art, though. I mean,
Yeah, that was great. In fact, let's back up and watch that again.
I'm not just talking. I'm talking like all of it. The zombie that came to dinner, where the
comics upset me.
Like the fact that y'all didn't see go further back. Like the zombie that came to dinner, that castle. Like
that castle was awesome.
Like what's being lost in this, like I do admit, is we're forgetting that the visual aspect of it and how like a lot of the art was still really amazing. Like, look how detailed that is.
That's ridiculously good.
Like look at the hand right there that you passed. That was holding the knife.
They do it all in like 9-panel grids usually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's super
really
impressive.
It really harkens back, to kind of go off topic here for a split second. Todd McFarlane saying in an interview he did with Stan Lee how every panel needs to be dynamic. It needs to catch your eye. It needs to do something to really make the reader feel like they're seeing things progress. And if it's one thing you are seeing in a lot of these old comics, that you're seeing panels that are dynamic, that stand out and tell a story, even if you're only seeing 1 to 2 panels of that story.
That's the good ones, though. There's a lot of bad GoldenAge comics.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a ton of them, and they're great, even though they're terrible.
So Taylor says a little while ago, he said, "It's weird to think that this was an era when people were fighting against the act of children reading."
I clipped that on my Twitter. That is the most hilarious quote. We never spent an afternoon like this reading. we did things that real boys do. Keep going.
It just goes to show that the government's always been enthralled in trying to control your children.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, also Dave asks, good question, not to answer it, but at what age is the monkey's paw or the telltale heart appropriate? That is a point. And that is something that a parent should decide. Okay, on with the show.
Well, yes, but I mean, what age was To Killing a Mockingbird technically a really appropriate story for us to read? I mean,
I read that in grade school, maybe. I don't remember.
Like, I'm a firm believer that sometimes you need to push those boundaries on younger audiences, but you need the right, and this is important, structure. This is, like you said, the parents that should be sitting there going, okay, this is the context that this story held and why it was so important for the time for this story to be told.
All right, let's get back into it.
We'll do this. I'm going to wrap up after we finish this thing.
I think you should hear.
Ooh, good.
The draining rain sprays the pane tenderly.
I like it.
The whistling wind winds round the weeds tenderly. And I come to you with arms out wide and one thought inside of me. So I take your lips, I take your heart tenderly.
And once again, every panel told the story.
But it is a fact, and I'll prove it to you later in the program. Horror and crime comics upset kids. I'm not talking about any subtle distortion of their emotional makeup. I think that occurs too. But there's a more noticeable, immediate effect. You can see the tension develop as the story gets more gruesome. And if it's a bad one, the kid is a mass of jangled nerves by the time he's through it.
He stabs trees.
Wait, I have never witnessed anything remotely like this.
It gets better. It gets better. Keep watching.
I read the Black Dossier.
Wait, he'll beat rocks together, and then
He's got the right faith.
This is more horrifying than the comic.
He just wanted to know what it would feel like to almost knock someone's brains out. This story is about a man who dissolves his own brother in a bathtub full of acid. 10 cents at your neighborhood newsstand.
The corpse
But it looks like I was wrong. They're not going to read all afternoon after all. They've got a great idea for a game.
It's called Dissolve Piggy in
Everybody
Acid.
can play.
Let's go beat
In this kind of a
delinquents,
game,
guys.
The more the merrier.
our innocence is being seduced.
Even the little guys are invited.
Come on, let's go.
My gang
get
used
a
to huddle
Volvo
too.
or
We tried to
something.
figure out how we could build a raft to use on the river, or how to earn money for a wiener roast, or how to talk the grocer into buying uniforms for a baseball team.
Wiener
We
roast.
usually figured it out too. Kids aren't always too realistic, but they're mighty ingenious, as you're about to see.
What?
They'll need a little special equipment for the game they're going to
Oh, the
play.
belts
Wait,
are coming
what?
off.
And they need one more man, preferably a small man.
He's gonna fit into the
They promise him he'll be the star of the game, and they're telling the truth. They're also telling the truth when they say it's the most exciting game he's ever played. And this is the beginning of a game of violence.
Game
They didn't think it up all by themselves, of course. They had an excellent manual. a
By
regular
Milton Bradley.
do-it-yourself pamphlet.
This is what you get for being a dirty ginger, you dirty
And they learned their
ginger.
lesson well.
They didn't come up with this game.
I'm not
by
suggesting that comic books instilled violence in the minds of
Get him,
the
guys.
I've
He's
never heard any
soulless.
responsible person
Do you not
suggest
see the red hair,
What I
green
am
eyes,
suggesting is that
pale
crime and
skin?
horror comic books stimulate outbursts of destructive violence that might otherwise have been channeled into much less antisocial activity.
Oh, they can put 'em on fire?
I mean, it's the only way to kill the ginger.
And remember, these are not the faces of an
Yeah, I've
isolated
seen this
group.
before, but they cut all this out of the version I saw.
This is definitely more horrifying than anything in this comic book.
I don't remember doing any of this at all.
I was gonna say I missed that issue of Spider-Man. The instructions for how to gang.
That's how the first wedgie started.
How to gang assault your fellow children.
I mean,
Okay.
this is horrifying.
So wait, so you can either read these comic books to learn how to con another 7-year-old into becoming a human sacrifice, or you can just watch this television special.
I mean, apparently this after-school special. Hey, kids, do you want to end up on the plate for a bunch of commie cultists?
You want
Then you need to read comic book
You
because
want to learn
that's
how to
how
summon
you do
Molech? Just tune in at 6. My goodness.
So after
it.
that,
And don't
he
forget
interviews-
don't forget to send in your box top so you can get the latest Ovaltine ring, Dakota ring, so you know how to summon Molrock right.
What are we even watching?
I know, right? After this, he Paul Coates interviews a bunch of kids, and he asks them to recount like the gruesome tales of their comic books. One kid sounds like he smokes cigarettes, which is kind of funny. But it's a very interesting video.
He does smoke cigarettes.
Yeah, I was gonna say the odds are he probably does. And they interview one comic book artist, and it's a very interesting bit. I think it's good to kind of give you a little bit of a picture of where people's minds were at and some of the zeitgeist that led to some of the elements that contributed to the code coming into existence and propagating it.
I think that show was done after the hearings, though, wasn't it?
It says it's aired in
October
1955.
955, so a year later.
Yeah, I thought so.
And it was a year after the code came out, so those books were like years old by the time.
So they were just trying to. They were probably paid the to put it together or something.
I mean, good possibility, but the whole point still stands. You know, the crux of my argument still stands that we need something like the code because parents have shrugged off their responsibility, and if they're shoving it onto the entertainment industry, they need to at least be able to rest assured that the entertainment industry that they are entrusting with raising their kids, because they cannot be bothered to do it, is at least sharing their same values.
You know what, Bob? I'll get Harvey Weinstein right on the case.
I mean, you're not wrong there. I'm not saying those people.
What do you mean by those people?
Oh gosh! All right, we're done.
What do you mean, you people?
I mean Hollywood types. Hollywood, listen, everybody. This is something Hollywood had its chance, and they proved they're all creeps.
They really did.
Don't give them any money. Come on, don't watch that Marvel movie. It's gonna suck anyway. Yeah,
dude. I was going to
the last good Star Wars was out in '86. Come on, just walk away. Just walk away.
Stop giving them, dude. Stop giving them your money.
And with that, go buy some indie comics, like the ones made by Twitless. They're good stuff. Yeah. I don't have descriptions, and I don't want to go into all the time because I gotta go do a thing, man. So I gotta sign out.
All right.
So follow us around on the social medias. Read the web comics. They're good stuff. And thank you guys so much for coming on. For Bob, I appreciate you coming on. First time you've been on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah. And Captain, thank you again for all of your historical insights. I appreciate that.
Excuse me. Thank you.
Taylor says Star Wars was never really that good. That's a different show.
It's all right.
That some other time. So, okay, we're gonna call it. We're gonna wrap it. Next week. Oh man, I forgot who's coming on next week. It's somebody talking about their comic book.
Rick.
That's I can't remember who it is. I forget.
That's specific. A person is coming on our comic book show to talk about comics.
Their
Surprise!
They've got a comic book coming out here. They wanted to take some time to pitch it. We haven't done one of those in a while, so we thought we would. In 2 weeks, though, I'm having Josh Howard on to talk about T-Bird and Throttle, and I am stoked, man.
Good dude, very good dude.
Solid book. Right. It's not really for kids though. It's for young adults. It's like the PG-13 and up kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Very
Deals
good read.
Realistically with adultery and loss and death and hope. It's amazing. But that's it. So we're going to call it. Thank you guys so much for coming on, and we'll do Shilling some other time.
But until then, don't you dare read comics, or your kids will gang up on other kids and kill them.
Get the ginger! He's soulless! We don't want
him! Hey, Fly Fox Pro shows up right at the end to say Wortham did nothing wrong. I think he was wrong, but I can't say he did anything wrong. That's it. Good night.
Later, folks.